On a sunny Saturday morning in the peaceful suburb of Pine Grove, 12-year-old Marcus Williams carefully arranged his freshly baked chocolate chip cookies on a folding table outside his family's modest home. The sweet aroma of vanilla and melted chocolate filled the air, drawing curious glances from passing neighbors. Marcus wasn't just any young boy selling cookies. He had a mission that made his heart both heavy and determined. His mother, Sarah Williams, a hard-working nurse's assistant, had recently been diagnosed with an illness that required expensive treatment. Their insurance wouldn't cover all the costs, and Marcus had overheard his mother crying late one night while looking at medical bills. The young boy had always been mature for his age. Growing up in a single-parent household had taught him responsibility early on. When he heard his mother's worries, he decided to take action. His grandmother had taught him how to bake the most delicious cookies using a secret family recipe, and everyone who tasted them always asked for more. For the past 3 weeks, Marcus had been waking up at 5 a.m. every Saturday to bake fresh batches. His mother thought he was just pursuing a hobby, but Marcus had bigger plans. Each cookie was carefully wrapped in clear cellophane with a small thank you note attached. He sold them for $2 each, or 3 for $5, and kept careful track of his earnings in a worn notebook. The neighbors in Pine Grove had quickly grown fond of the young entrepreneur. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman from 2 houses down, bought a dozen cookies every weekend to share with her bridge club. Mr. Thompson, the local mechanic, would stop by after his morning jog and always left a generous tip. Even the kids from Marcus's school would bring their allowance money to buy his treats. That particular Saturday morning felt different. Marcus had already made over $300 in the past weeks, carefully hiding the money in a shoebox under his bed. He hoped to surprise his mother with the money soon, but he wanted to reach at least $500 first. As he set up his stand, Marcus made sure everything looked professional. He had a neat handwritten sign that read Marcus's famous homemade cookies in careful block letters. He wore a clean white apron his grandmother had given him, and he'd even made small business cards using the library's computer and printer. Several regular customers had already stopped by that morning. The Robinson twins from his math class bought 6 cookies between them, and Mrs. Henderson had already picked up her weekly dozen. Business was going well, and Marcus felt proud as he counted his morning's earnings. Around 10 o'clock, he noticed a new Mercedes slow down as it passed his stand. The driver, a woman he'd never seen before, peered out her window with a frown. Marcus smiled and waved, just as his mother had taught him to be polite to everyone, but the woman didn't wave back. Instead, she pulled out her phone and appeared to make a call. Marcus didn't think much of it. He was too busy serving Mr. Thompson, who had just arrived for his usual post-jog cookies. "These are the best cookies in town, young man," Mr. Thompson said, biting into one. "You got a real talent for business." The compliment made Marcus stand a little taller. He was carefully counting out change when he noticed a police car turning onto his street. This wasn't unusual. Officer Rodriguez often patrolled the neighborhood and would sometimes stop for a cookie. But this wasn't Officer Rodriguez's car. The police cruiser pulled up sharply to the curb, and an officer Marcus had never seen before stepped out. Officer James Barrett was a tall man with cold eyes and a stern expression. He walked toward Marcus's stand with heavy steps, his hand resting on his belt. Marcus's heart started beating faster, but he reminded himself that he hadn't done anything wrong. He had even checked with his mother about selling cookies, and she had helped him understand about food safety and handling money properly. "Good morning, officer," Marcus said cheerfully, trying to keep his voice steady. "Would you like to try a cookie? They're homemade." But Officer Barrett wasn't looking at the cookies. His eyes were scanning the table, the money box, and Marcus's appearance with an intensity that made the boy's smile fade. The morning sun suddenly felt a little less warm, and the sweet smell of cookies in the air was overshadowed by a growing sense of unease. Mr. Thompson, still standing nearby, sensed the tension and stayed put, his half-eaten cookie forgotten in his hand. The peaceful Saturday morning was about to take an unexpected turn that would change not just Marcus's life, but the entire community of Pine Grove. Officer James Barrett stood rigidly before Marcus's cookie stand, his face stern and unmoving. The morning breeze carried the sweet scent of freshly baked cookies, but the atmosphere had grown tense and heavy. Mr. Thompson, still present from his earlier purchase, watched the scene unfold with growing concern. "Do you have a permit to sell food here?" Officer Barrett's voice was sharp and cold. nothing like the friendly tone Marcus was used to hearing from Officer Rodriguez. Before Marcus could answer, the officer continued, "Who's supervising you? Where are your parents?" Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he responded, "My mom knows I'm selling cookies, sir. She helped me learn about food safety. I keep everything clean and wrapped properly." He gestured toward his neatly packaged cookies, each one carefully sealed in cellophane. Officer Barrett's eyes narrowed. "I received a call about suspicious activity in this neighborhood. You can't just set up shop wherever you want, boy. This is a residential area, not a marketplace." Mr. Thompson stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Officer, if I may, this young man has been selling cookies here for weeks. He's well known in the neighborhood, and his mother is aware." "Step back, sir," Officer Barrett interrupted sharply. "This is a police matter." His hand remained near his belt as he turned back to Marcus. "Pack up this stand immediately." More neighbors had begun to gather, drawn by the unusual sight of a police car in their peaceful street. Mrs. Henderson emerged from her house, still holding one of Marcus's cookies. Several other residents stopped their morning activities to watch. Marcus, trying to stay calm like his mother had taught him, began explaining, "Officer, I'm raising money for my mom's medical." "I said pack it up." Officer Barrett cut him off. "No license, no permit, no adult supervision. This is illegal vending, and I could charge you with multiple violations." Sarah Chen, who lived across the street, had started recording the interaction on her phone. Other neighbors were pulling out their phones too, concerned by the officer's aggressive tone toward a child they all knew and respected. Marcus, his hands shaking more visibly now, began carefully putting his cookies into their storage container. Tears threatened to spill from his eyes, but he blinked them back, remembering his mother's words about staying strong in difficult situations. "Not fast enough," Officer Barrett declared, stepping behind the table. Without warning, he began roughly shoving the carefully arranged cookies into a pile. Several fell to the ground, their wrapping crumpling under his heavy boots. "Please, sir," Marcus pleaded, "I can pack them properly. Those cookies are for my mom's." The officer reached for his handcuffs. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." A collective gasp arose from the gathering crowd. Mrs. Henderson called out, "This is ridiculous. He's just a child selling cookies." Mr. Thompson moved forward again, his voice firm but controlled. "Officer, surely this isn't necessary. I'm happy to call his mother right now. She works at Pine Grove General Hospital." But Officer Barrett had already grabbed Marcus's wrist, spinning him around. The young boy, terrified and confused, didn't resist as the cold metal handcuffs clipped around his small wrists. Tears now flowed freely down his cheeks. "You have the right to remain silent." Officer Barrett began reciting, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. The growing crowd of neighbors had formed a semicircle around the scene, many recording, others calling various numbers on their phones. Marcus stood there, handcuffed and frightened, his pristine white apron now stained with chocolate from the crushed cookies. His carefully written sign lay trampled on the ground, and his morning's earnings were scattered across the table. Mrs. Henderson had tears in her eyes as she dialed Marcus's mother's number. Sarah Chen was live-streaming the entire incident on social media, her hands shaking with anger. Mr. Thompson was on the phone with the police department, requesting a supervisor at the scene. Through it all, Marcus remained surprisingly composed despite his tears, his grandmother's words echoing in his mind. "Stand tall, even when they try to make you feel small." He looked at his ruined cookie stand, thinking of his mother and how he'd have to tell her about this instead of surprising her with the money he'd saved. The peaceful Saturday morning had transformed into a scene of tension and disbelief, as neighbors watched helplessly while Officer Barrett led Marcus toward his patrol car. None of them could have predicted how this incident would soon spark a movement that would shake their community to its core. As Officer Barrett led Marcus to the police car, the neighborhood erupted into action. Sarah Chen's live stream had already attracted thousands of viewers, and phones were buzzing throughout Pine Grove with messages about what was happening to their young cookie entrepreneur. Marcus's mother, Sarah Williams, was in the middle of her shift at Pine Grove General Hospital when her phone started flooding with messages and calls. When she finally saw Mrs. Henderson's frantic video message showing her son in handcuffs, she dropped everything and raced to her car, her heart pounding with fear and anger. Back at the scene, Marcus sat in the back of the police car, his small frame dwarfed by the vehicle's cage divider. Through the window, you could see his neighbors arguing with Officer Barrett. Mr. Thompson's usually friendly face was red with anger as he held his phone up, showing something to the officer who seemed increasingly agitated by the growing crowd. This is a clear case of racial profiling. Someone shouted from the gathering crowd. More voices joined in, phones recording every moment. Officer Barrett's face grew harder as he realized just how many people were filming him. Step back from the vehicle, he commanded the crowd, his hand resting on his weapon. This is a police matter, and you're all interfering with an arrest. Just then, another police car arrived with flashing lights. Officer Rodriguez, the regular neighborhood patrol officer, stepped out, his face showing confusion and concern. He immediately recognized Marcus through the car window and approached Officer Barrett. "James, what's going on here?" Officer Rodriguez asked, taking in the scene of scattered cookies, the overturned table, and the agitated crowd. "I know this kid. He's been selling cookies here for weeks." Before Officer Barrett could respond, a blue Honda screeched to a halt nearby. Sarah Williams jumped out, still wearing her hospital scrubs, her face a mixture of fear and fury. "Where is my son?" she demanded, pushing through the crowd. "Marcus, baby, are you okay?" Marcus pressed his face against the car window, his eyes wet with tears. "Mom, I'm sorry, I just wanted to help with the medical bills." The crowd fell silent as Sarah turned to Officer Barrett, her voice trembling with controlled anger. "Why is my 12-year-old son in handcuffs for selling cookies?" Officer Rodriguez stepped between them, trying to defuse the situation. "Mrs. Williams, there seems to be a misunderstanding. I've seen Marcus selling his cookies before. He's never caused any trouble." A resident reported suspicious activity. Officer Barrett stated firmly. The minor was conducting business without a permit in a residential area. Sarah Chen, still live streaming, moved closer. The suspicious activity was a black child selling cookies. Is that what we're calling suspicious now? The video comments were flooding in by the thousands. Local news vans were already turning onto the street, attracted by the viral social media posts. Officer Barrett's face began to show the first signs of uncertainty as he realized how quickly the situation had escalated. Officer Rodriguez spoke quietly to his colleague. "James, this isn't worth it. The kid was just selling cookies. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be." But it was already too big. The local news crews were setting up their cameras. Mrs. Henderson had contacted her daughter, a civil rights attorney, who was already on her way. Mr. Thompson had reached the police chief on his phone. Sarah Williams stood her ground, her voice steady now. "Either you release my son right now, or the next thing you'll see is our story on every news channel in the country. Your choice, Officer Barrett." The crowd watched as Officer Barrett's stern facade began to crack under the pressure of dozens of recording phones, news cameras, and the arrival of more police vehicles. His hands moved toward his keys as he realized he had grossly miscalculated the situation. Inside the police car, Marcus watched everything unfold through the window. Despite his fear, he felt a warmth in his chest, seeing how his neighbors had come together to support him. Mrs. Henderson was already organizing people to help clean up his scattered cookies and restore his stand. The day had turned into something much bigger than his simple plan to help with his mother's medical bills. As Officer Barrett finally moved to unlock the car door, none of them knew that this incident would not end here. It was about to become a catalyst for change that would reach far beyond the streets of Pine Grove. By Sunday morning, Marcus's story had spread far beyond Pine Grove. The video of his arrest had been viewed millions of times, and national news networks were running the story on their morning shows. But in the Williams living room, Marcus and his mother sat surrounded by neighbors who had come to show their support. "Look at this, Marcus," Mrs. Henderson said, showing him her tablet. "Your story is trending nationwide. People are outraged about what happened to you." The hashtag Cookies for Marcus was spreading across social media platforms, with thousands sharing their own stories of similar experiences. Sarah Chen's live stream video had been picked up by major news outlets. The image of a 12-year-old boy in handcuffs, still wearing his white apron with chocolate stains, had struck a chord with people across the country. But what really caught everyone's attention was how the community had rallied around him. "We got something to show you, buddy," Mr. Thompson said, pulling out an envelope. Inside was a business license for Marcus's famous cookies, paid for by the neighborhood association. We took care of all the paperwork. You're now officially licensed to sell your cookies anywhere in Pine Grove. Marcus's eyes widened as he held the license. His mother squeezed his shoulder, fighting back tears. But that wasn't all. Mrs. Henderson's daughter, Lisa, the civil rights attorney, spread some papers on the coffee table. We're filing a formal complaint against Officer Barrett, Lisa explained. But more importantly, we're using this incident to push for major changes in police training and community relations. Several other families have come forward with similar stories about Officer Barrett. The local news had been digging into Officer Barrett's history, discovering a pattern of complaints about racial profiling and excessive force, particularly in cases involving minorities. The police chief had scheduled a press conference for later that day to address the situation. Outside the Williams home, something extraordinary was happening. People from all over the city were showing up with baking supplies, mixing bowls, and offers to help. The local grocery store had donated ingredients for hundreds of cookies. The owner of a popular bakery offered to let Marcus use their industrial kitchen. "This isn't just about cookies anymore," Sarah Williams said, watching the growing crowd through her window. "This is about making sure no other child has to go through what Marcus experienced." Marcus, still processing everything that had happened, sat at his kitchen table writing thank you notes to everyone who had supported him. His grandmother had always taught him the importance of gratitude, even in difficult times. By afternoon, the street had transformed into an impromptu community gathering. Families were baking cookies together, sharing stories, and discussing ways to prevent similar incidents in the future. Local business owners came with proposals to sell Marcus's cookies in their stores. The mayor herself stopped by, cameras in tow, to present Marcus with a special community service award. But what touched Marcus most was when Officer Rodriguez arrived, off-duty and in civilian clothes, to apologize on behalf of his department. "We're supposed to protect and serve," Officer Rodriguez said, kneeling to meet Marcus at eye level. "What happened yesterday? That's not protection. That's not service. We need to do better, and your courage is helping us learn that lesson." Sarah Chen had organized an online fundraiser for Marcus's mother's medical bills. In less than 24 hours, it had raised over $50,000, far exceeding their initial goal. People from across the country were sending messages of support and their own stories of resilience. As the day went on, Marcus's story continued to evolve. Civil rights leaders were using it as an example of both ongoing systemic issues and the power of community action. Educational organizations were developing teaching materials about civic responsibility and peaceful resistance based on how Pine Grove's residents had responded. Marcus sat on his front porch, watching children and adults working together to bake cookies, their hands covered in flour, laughter filling the air. The fear from yesterday was still there, but it was being transformed into something powerful and positive. "You know what, Mom?" he said, as his mother joined him on the porch. "I think we're going to need a bigger cookie stand." Sarah hugged her son, watching their neighborhood united in purpose and solidarity. What had started as a simple plan to help with medical bills had become a movement for change, proving that sometimes the smallest actions could spark the biggest transformations. Monday morning arrived with a different energy at the Pine Grove Police Department. Police Chief Diana Martinez sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of complaints against Officer Barrett that had previously been buried in the system. The viral video of Marcus's arrest had forced the department to confront issues they had long ignored. "This stops now," Chief Martinez declared to her assembled command staff. She had spent Sunday night reviewing body camera footage, not just from Marcus's arrest. Meanwhile, at Pine Grove Middle School, Marcus walked through the hallways to find himself treated differently. Students and teachers alike stopped to show their support. His math teacher, Mr. Peters, had even used the incident as a real-world example of percentages, calculating how quickly the video had spread across social media. "The internal affairs investigation will be thorough," announced Chief Martinez at a press conference later that morning. "But more importantly, we're implementing immediate changes in our department's training and community engagement policies." The investigation revealed uncomfortable truths. Officer Barrett had accumulated 17 complaints in his 5 years on the force, all involving interactions with minorities. Most had been dismissed or buried under paperwork. The officer who had filed the reports, including Officer Rodriguez, had been consistently ignored. Lisa Henderson, now representing the Williams family, presented a detailed timeline of incidents to the police review board. "This isn't about one cookie stand," she explained. "This is about a pattern of behavior that has gone unchecked for far too long." Local businesses began sharing their security footage, showing Marcus's previous weekends at his cookie stand. The videos painted a picture of a responsible young entrepreneur who kept his area clean, was polite to customers, and even helped elderly neighbors carry their purchases home. The woman who had called the police that Saturday was identified as Karen Maxwell, a new resident in the neighborhood. When interviewed by local news, she struggled to explain why she had found a child selling cookies suspicious. I just thought it looked out of place," she stammered, as the reporter asked increasingly uncomfortable questions about what exactly had seemed suspicious about Marcus. By Tuesday, Officer Barrett was placed on administrative leave. The police union initially tried to defend his actions, but the public pressure was too intense. Even fellow officers began speaking out, sharing their own concerns about his behavior over the years. The investigation expanded beyond just Officer Barrett. Chief Martinez ordered a complete review of all civilian complaints from the past 5 years. The results were troubling. A clear pattern of racial disparities in how complaints were handled and resolved. "We're not just investigating one incident," Chief Martinez explained to the city council. "We're examining our entire system. How did we let this happen? How many warning signs did we ignore?" Marcus, despite being at the center of this storm, continued his schoolwork and, with his new business license, his cookie sales. The experience had changed him, making him more aware of the world around him, but it hadn't dampened his entrepreneurial spirit. Sarah Williams had taken a few days off work to handle the media requests and meetings with civil rights organizations. She was determined to turn her son's traumatic experience into positive change for the community. "My son was handcuffed for showing initiative and responsibility," she said during a community meeting. "If we don't fix this now, whose child will be next?" The investigation also revealed something unexpected. Several officers had tried to report Officer Barrett's behavior before, but their concerns had been dismissed by previous department leadership. Chief Martinez made sure these officers were now heard. As the week progressed, the investigation widened to include training procedures, complaint handling processes, and community engagement policies. What had started with one incident was revealing systemic issues that needed addressing. Officer Rodriguez, who had always treated Marcus with respect during his patrols, became a key witness in the investigation. His detailed records of previous incidents helped establish the pattern of behavior that could no longer be ignored. By Friday, Chief Martinez had drafted a comprehensive reform proposal. It included mandatory de-escalation training, community oversight boards, and new procedures for handling civilian complaints. The incident with Marcus had become a catalyst for change that would affect the entire department. The investigation was far from over, but it was already clear that Pine Grove would never be quite the same. What happened at a simple cookie stand had cracked open issues that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. 2 weeks after the cookie stand incident, Officer James Barrett sat alone in his living room, watching the news coverage that wouldn't stop. His face appeared on the screen repeatedly, always next to the image of Marcus in handcuffs. For the first time in his 15-year career, he began to see himself through others' eyes. His daughter, Emma, a high school senior, had stopped speaking to him. "That boy was my age when you arrested him," she had said before leaving to stay with her mother. "He was just trying to help his mom, Dad. How could you?" The mandatory sensitivity training sessions ordered by Chief Martinez were different from anything Barrett had experienced before. Instead of typical classroom lectures, community members shared their personal stories. Today's session had hit particularly hard. "My son doesn't want to be a police officer anymore," a black mother had said, looking directly at Barrett. "He used to dream about it, but after seeing what happened to Marcus, he's afraid." "How do we fix that, Officer Barrett?" The question had stayed with him all day. Back at home, he pulled out his phone and watched Sarah Chen's livestream video again. He saw himself through new eyes, not as an officer maintaining order, but as a man handcuffing a child for showing initiative and responsibility. That evening, Barrett made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He requested a meeting with Marcus and his family, not through his union representative or the department, but through Mr. Thompson, who had been there that day. The meeting was arranged for the following Saturday, exactly 3 weeks after the incident. It would take place at the community center, with Chief Martinez present as a neutral party. Barrett arrived early, his hands shaking as he waited. When Marcus entered with his mother, Barrett saw not a suspicious person, but a young boy with dreams and determination. Sarah Williams stood protective beside her son, her face a mixture of caution and curiosity. "I spent these weeks thinking about what I did," Barrett began, his voice unsteady. "I've been a police officer for 15 years, and I thought I was doing my job right. But I wasn't. I was letting my fears and prejudices control my actions." Marcus listened quietly as Barrett continued. "I saw you that day, but I didn't really see you. I saw what I expected to see, what I was trained to see. And that was wrong. Deeply wrong." To everyone's surprise, Barrett reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a check, his entire previous month's salary. "This is for your mother's medical fund," he said. "It won't fix what I did, but it's a start." Sarah Williams started to refuse, but Barrett interrupted. "Please. My daughter Emma helped me understand. She said if I want to make things right, I need to do more than just say sorry." Then Barrett did something unprecedented. He took off his badge and placed it on the table. "I'm requesting a transfer to community services," he announced. "I want to work with young people like Marcus, help them achieve their dreams instead of standing in their way." Chief Martinez, who had been quietly observing, nodded in approval. The department's new community engagement program needed officers who understood the importance of change. Marcus, who had remained quiet throughout, finally spoke. "Officer Barrett," he said, his voice clear and confident, "would you like to try one of my cookies? They're fresh from this morning." The simple offer brought tears to Barrett's eyes. From his jacket pocket, he pulled out a crumpled business card, one of the ones Marcus had made at the library. "I've been carrying this since that day," he admitted, "as a reminder of what I need to change." The meeting extended beyond its scheduled time as they talked about creating a youth entrepreneurship program, with Barrett and Marcus working together to help other young people pursue their business dreams legally and safely. As they left the community center, Barrett felt lighter than he had in weeks. He couldn't undo his actions, but he could help ensure they never happened again. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Proud of you, Dad. Can I come home?" Outside, the evening sun cast long shadows across the community center's lawn. Marcus and his mother walked to their car, followed by Barrett, who now saw the world differently. The transformation wasn't complete, but it had begun, not just for Barrett, but for the entire community of Pine Grove. Something that had started with fear and prejudice was becoming a story of change and redemption, one cookie at a time. 3 months after the incident, Pine Grove had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The community center buzzed with activity as Marcus and former Officer Barrett, now Mr. Barrett, prepared for the first session of their Young Entrepreneurs program. 20 students, ranging from ages 10 to 16, sat eagerly in their seats. Each had a dream of starting their own small business, just as Marcus had done. At the front of the room, Marcus adjusted his new business casual shirt, a gift from Mr. Thompson for his speaking engagements. "Welcome, everyone," Marcus began, his confidence growing with each word. 3 months ago, I was just a kid selling cookies. Today, I'm here to help you learn how to turn your ideas into real businesses, legally and safely." Mr. Barrett stood at the back of the room, watching with pride. His new role as community youth coordinator felt more rewarding than his 15 years on the police force. His daughter Emma sat among the students, planning her own photography business. Sarah Williams, now fully recovered thanks to the medical treatment funded by the community's support, watched from the doorway. Her son had grown so much since that Saturday morning. Marcus's cookie business had expanded into a proper small enterprise, with help from local businesses and mentors. "Before we start," Marcus continued, "I want you to meet someone special." He gestured to Mr. Barrett, who walked to the front of the room. Some of the students shifted uncomfortably, recognizing him from the viral video. "Many of you know what happened 3 months ago," Mr. Barrett addressed the class. "But what you might not know is how that moment changed both our lives for the better. Sometimes, the biggest mistakes can lead to the most important lessons." The program they had developed together was revolutionary. Local business owners volunteered as mentors. teaching everything from budget management to marketing. The police department provided information about business regulations and permits, building trust with young entrepreneurs instead of suspicion. During the session, Marcus shared his story, not just the arrest, but everything that came after. How the community had supported him, how his business had grown, and how he had learned to turn a negative experience into positive change. Success isn't just about making money, Marcus explained, pointing to his presentation slide. It's about building relationships and helping your community grow. The students nodded, taking notes and asking questions. Mr. Barrett then led a segment about understanding local business laws and working with authorities. His perspective as a former officer, combined with his new role, provided unique insights that the students found valuable. The goal isn't just to follow rules, he explained, but to understand why they exist and how they can protect both you and your customers. During the break, Sarah Chen, who had recorded the viral video months ago, was there too, documenting this new chapter for a documentary about community transformation. Her camera captured the easy interaction between Marcus and Mr. Barrett as they helped students develop their business plans. Chief Martinez stopped by near the end of the session. The police department had undergone significant changes under her leadership. New training programs, community engagement initiatives, and accountability measures were already showing positive results. What you two have created here, she told Marcus and Mr. Barrett, is exactly what community policing should look like. You're building bridges instead of walls. As the session ended, students gathered around Marcus and Mr. Barrett, eager to share their business ideas. One wanted to start a dog walking service, another planned to teach computer skills to seniors. Each idea represented a dream that might have been stopped by fear or prejudice just a few months ago. Emma approached her father with a smile. "Dad," she said, showing him her business plan for a youth photography service, "I think I finally understand why this matters so much to you now." Marcus packed up his materials, including his famous cookies, which had become a staple at these sessions. His small business had grown into something bigger than he'd imagined, not just selling cookies, but inspiring others and changing his community. As they left the community center that evening, Marcus and Mr. Barrett walked side by side, discussing plans for the next session. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, seeming to promise an even brighter tomorrow for Pine Grove and its young entrepreneurs. The story that had begun with handcuffs and tears was transforming into one of hope, understanding, and positive change. But even as this chapter neared its end, everyone knew the real work was just beginning. On a bright Saturday morning, exactly 1 year after the incident that changed Pine Grove forever, the town square was filled with colorful booths and excited chatter. It was the first annual Young Entrepreneurs Fair, and at its center stood a professional-looking stand with a familiar sign, Marcus's Famous Cookies. Marcus, now 13, wore a crisp business suit as he presented his success story to a crowd of aspiring young entrepreneurs and their families. His cookie business had grown into Marcus's mentoring and treats, a successful enterprise that not only sold delicious cookies, but also helped other young people start their own businesses. "1 year ago, I was handcuffed for trying to help my mom," Marcus said, his voice strong and clear. "Today, I'm standing here as the owner of a licensed business that employs 5 other teenagers and has helped launch 20 new youth-owned businesses in our community." Mr. Barrett sat in the audience beside his daughter Emma, who was now running a successful youth photography service. He no longer wore a police uniform, but his new role as community youth coordinator had earned him more respect than his badge ever did. The Young Entrepreneurs Program, which Marcus and Mr. Barrett had started together, had become a model for other communities across the country. Representatives from different cities were there to learn how Pine Grove had transformed a moment of crisis into lasting positive change. Chief Martinez took the stage to share the police department's transformation. "Our arrest rates are down 40%, she announced, while community engagement has increased by over 200%. We've learned that building trust is more effective than building barriers." Sarah Williams, fully recovered and now running a support group for families facing medical challenges, watched proudly as her son handled questions from reporters. Marcus's initiative had not only paid for her medical bills, but had created a community fund to help other families in similar situations. The fair showcased dozens of young entrepreneurs who had graduated from their program. There was a tech support booth run by teenagers, a senior citizens assistance service, and even a youth-led environmental cleanup company. Each business had started with a dream and grown with the support of the community. Mr. Thompson, who had been there on that fateful day, now served on the board of the Young Entrepreneurs Foundation, which provided startup grants to kids with business ideas. Sometimes, he told a group of visitors, the worst moments can lead to the best changes. Sarah Chen's documentary about Pine Grove's transformation was playing on a large screen at the fair. The footage of Marcus's arrest played alongside scenes of the community coming together, showing how far they had come. Near the end of the fair, Marcus and Mr. Barrett gathered all the young entrepreneurs for a group photo. Standing together, they represented every race and background, each wearing a badge that read Future Leaders of Pine Grove. The real success isn't in the businesses we built, Marcus told the crowd during his closing speech. It's in the bridges we created. Every cookie I sell, every young person we help, proves that change is possible when we choose to learn from our mistakes and work together. Officer Rodriguez, who had stayed on the force and become a leading advocate for community policing, brought his own children to the fair. This is what protecting and serving really means, he told them, pointing to the thriving community around them. As the sun began to set on the successful day, Marcus and Mr. Barrett sat at the cookie stand, sharing the last batch of cookies with Emma and Sarah Williams. They talked about their plans to expand the program to neighboring cities and the upcoming National Youth Business Conference, where Marcus would be a keynote speaker. You know what's amazing? Marcus said, looking around at the community he had helped transform. That day could have made me afraid or angry. Instead, it taught me that when people come together, even the worst moments can lead to the best changes. Mr. Barrett nodded, watching his daughter pack up her photography equipment. Sometimes it takes a child to teach adults the most important lessons, he replied. As they closed down the fair, the streets of Pine Grove were filled with hope and possibility. The story that had begun with prejudice and fear had become one of transformation and unity. Marcus's cookies had done more than raise money for medical bills. They had helped heal a community and create a model for positive change that would continue to inspire others for years to come. The end of this story was really just the beginning of something much bigger, proving that sometimes the sweetest changes start with a simple cookie stand and the courage to make things right.